Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Meticulous Talks for July 22nd. I am, as always, Cursed Chords.
And I'm Hifrock.
Unfortunately, solving problems is away at a convention this weekend. Not a pony convention, but a convention all the same. And, well, he's told us he's having a great time, so good for him.
Yeah, and we will have our conventions next week, I presume. Are you going to any?
Well, next week is BronyCon, and you're going to be in Galacon. I'm not going to be at either of those. Yep. But 2 weeks from now is Gen Con, and I am going to be there for that one.
I see.
Yeah, and so we'll have, for my case, I do always bring my laptop along, and we'll stream from my hotel, and it should be fine. The last couple of years I've done it, so. Get a live, I don't want to say like live from the con, because I will be not actually there when I'm doing it, but pretty much the most sort of, what you say, the quickest take of how things have gone in that tournament and such after the fact.
I see.
But speaking of which, these con tournaments that are going to be going on, which that's what we're going to the conventions. Well, yeah, for the most part, are going to be a little different now as opposed to what we were thinking about just last week, given that this whole new ban list got handed down from on high. Was it Thursday night, I think? It pretty much went up?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Friday for me, I guess.
Yeah, I guess for you it was Friday. It was.
But yeah, I woke up and do the bands.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I saw them pretty late at night myself. I've been busy with a bunch of other stuff, and then got it dropped on us. And well, it's kind of a far-reaching. Is this like one of the most? I mean, you haven't been around for way back in the day, but I think this is like one of the most number of cards affected in a single update to the list. We have 4 cards that have had their status changed, as it were. And I can't remember any bans where that many cards had something happen to them at the same time.
Yeah. I honestly only expected, kind of expected main 6 ban, but not the others.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, main 6 is, well, it's one of the sort of more obvious ones that everyone was kind of complaining about forever. But, yeah, well, we'll get to it in its due time. But, yeah, that's definitely going to be the topic of our stream today. It's just sort of where things are going to go with these cards, either in the case of Vapor Trail, back in, or out, as is the case for all the other ones. And so, starting off with that, we're going to kind of go from what I expect is sort of least controversial to most controversial here, which on its own sort of bears its own way of thinking it, because from what I've seen, looking on Reddit and a little bit on Facebook as well, there actually hasn't been a whole lot of controversy over these bans. Has that been your experience as well, from what you've seen?
Some of my players in my local play group didn't really like F-stop ban, even though they don't even play F-stop. But yeah, other than that, pretty much no controversy.
Mm-hmm. Which is a little strange, again, given the scope of the changes that have been made. But I guess it goes to show that some of these, as I'm sure I agree, some of these were a little bit overdue. So it's good to see. In any event, like I say, we'll start with Vapor Trail. She was originally banned due to an unfortunate interaction with Premier Main Twilight, whereby you got her involved in a face-off, and then you flip a card, which is naturally going to stick around. I actually don't remember all the specifics of how that deck actually worked, because it was only around for a couple of weeks before it just got snapped off the off the game. But in any event, Premier Twilight doesn't exist in core, so Vapor Trail gets her second chance.
Yeah, I personally think she's like still very strong outside of that. Even, I mean, I saw her in draft with Thorax. That was pretty insane.
Yep. That chaos effect is still really good for one thing. But yeah, I can certainly imagine her fitting into a Thorax deck, even like a Thorax farming deck maybe. It sort of prevents you. It gives you a little bit of a second line of defense. If Thorax gets moved away from a problem, you can still farm with him. Kind of. I had originally rated the card as like bottom of the list, but I think there is some possibility that she comes back in. Honestly, yeah.
Yeah, I wonder if we'll see her at the tournaments. It'd be interesting to see.
It would be nice, yeah. Like everyone's obviously going to be kind of scrambling to make sense of how things are going to go in the new meta, and due to a reason that we're going to get to, it's entirely true that Thorax might be getting a little bit of a boost. If people want to farm with him, for example, or I know him using him in an aggro deck is still totally fine too.
Yeah, I think you have a certain player who plays Thorax all the time.
Yeah, every week.
But yeah, he can definitely include Vapor Trail now. Well, not now, in the next week, into his deck. Or is he playing Harmony?
We play both sometimes. Like, his deck never changes, but he allows me to play Harmony decks against it. Because it's like good enough, basically.
But yeah.
Yeah, so, next up, in terms of, again, least controversial of the bans, is, of course, Main 6. The card that was making waves, really, from the day that it was released. People were, to some extent, already saying, man, this card is too good, even before the effect fully sunk in of what exactly it was capable of. And then, pretty much after the interaction with Party Hard became kind of widespread, everyone was like, oh, well, yeah, this card kind of needs to go. And so it has, even in Harmony, which was actually that was the only part of this ban that was even that was a little surprising to me, was that Main 6 was banned all the way across, even in Harmony.
Maybe it's not to limit the design space.
Maybe, yeah. It's true that the card, the effect is still just as good in Harmony, but.
And I mean, you can still do the Main 6 Party Hard if you wouldn't ban it in Harmony, which is pretty devastating.
Mm-hmm.
It's really hard to recover from this card combination.
Yeah, and as people have said, it's not impossible, but it's very difficult to play around. It requires you to do something very specific to not be vulnerable to it. So.
Yeah, I think the main problem with it is it's just 2 cards. Like, your deck doesn't even need to be built around it. You can just include it and it works, and your deck can do its own thing.
Mm-hmm. Yep. As we saw with its inclusion in orange, with its inclusion in virtually everything that was running pink, even if it didn't necessarily have the colors, everything would just kind of splash enough. I mean, you usually want to be in pink because Main 6 has a really high pink requirement. But besides that, you would splash for the interaction color no matter what, because it's usually just one card that you need to care about.
Mm-hmm.
So
I wonder if we were going to get more decks that play friends, given that There's no threat such as main 6 now.
Well, yeah, there's so many decks that, purple, for example. Purple control was just so many times that I've tried to build it in the past in like Sequestria. It's like, okay, well, you rely on having your coverage out and on having your friends that do stuff, and it's just like, well, this is strong against like everything. Well, maybe not everything, but this is reasonable except main 6. There's just like nothing you can do about main 6 with that strategy, except like try to win before it happens, or have enough abilities to look at your opponent's hand to get rid of it before it can be played. So yeah, that gets enabled. Now that this is gone. Certainly wide strategies like yellow, like blue, that again, their only real counterplay was just try to win before main 6 could go down. That certainly gets helped out a lot. The meta where like pink is just so dominant, certainly that recedes a lot without main 6 in play and without the necessity of running sort of a lean removal focus style as well.
Mm-hmm. And without main 6, pink is still pretty strong, so it's a very well-deserved ban overall, in every sense, I think.
Yeah, no arguments here. Okay.
Okay, F-stop?
Yeah, so third up, F-stop as well. This being a card that, well, F-stop getting banned, let's first just talk about it on its own here. Let me just find it here. F-stop, white. I'm just looking for it on Pony Head. Sure. As if we don't know what this card does, but has been the cornerstone of Harmony control or at least Harmony event-based control. There are other ways to do control in Harmony, but since Premiere, since the game started, and yeah, that is essentially the reason why it got banned. It's cemented a style that has been pretty good for the entire run of the game, and showed no sign of getting changed. It's been one of the oldest jokes in the game, actually, that F-stop was a card that always got better with every set release because there are more events in the game now, and so he's better.
Yeah. I never actually had the chance to play him or against him because I don't play Harmony a lot.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah. I think the main problem with the stop that it's really cheap. It's only 180 to get back any event. And we right now have some alternatives to stop, like Moondancer or Cleaning Up and other cards. There's also Cadence, but they're all much more expensive than F-stop.
Yeah.
So I personally think that event control can still be relevant without F-stop. Like find the ways around with Moondancer and other things. Especially like people do that in core right now because in core there's no F-stop. But yeah. F-stop was really cheap.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's kind of become clear that, well, F-stop was sort of we know that mistakes were made in Premiere sometimes with regard to costs and such, and F-stop he kind of got away with it for a long time, but I think even beyond the actual power level impact and such, the fact that F-stop's getting banned actually speaks to a much nicer thing to realize, which is that clearly Interplay does still care about Harmony, and they are still going to make changes that have a beneficial impact on these cards that are only in Harmony, and are still having a deleterious effect on the metagame like F-stop was. That's really good to know from a player's perspective who wants to keep playing in Harmony.
Yep. I think it will be interesting to see what Harmony decks we'll see in the future without f-stop. I mean, control decks in particular.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That is probably the big question. Is that what does control look like in the era after f-stop goes away?
Yep. I honestly did not expect f-stop ban at all. It kind of caught me off guard. Same with Applejack ban, which we'll talk later, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It's one of those things that, again, I think people who've been around for a long time are probably a little bit less surprised. I guess myself as well, because once you've seen f-stop be in so many control decks for so long, it's one of those things that, like, the f-stop ban is not like other bans that we've seen so far. At least that's the impression that I get of it. I do sometimes come back to Hearthstone because that's the game that I play sort of most often outside of other CCGs, and in that game there's this concept of what they call the Hall of Fame, which is like, they have the rotating format, and then they also have this fixed format. This fixed set that's like always in standard, or core for us. And every so often they like move a card out of that set. It's like, this card is just too good, and we're not going to have it in standard anymore. And I feel like that happens when the card is not necessarily broken per se, but it is just too good. It's like always in the meta. And I feel like that's very similar to what's happening right now with f-stop. This card is it doesn't enable anything that's specifically terrible for the game, but it's just a little bit too powerful to be allowed to stick around. This card is just always going to be in the meta, and clearly Interplay doesn't want that to happen.
Mm-hmm. Didn't Interplay do bans like that before? Like, as far as I'm aware, all the bans before were like when cards were getting really problematic.
Yeah, essentially. Most of the bans before, were cards that enabled seriously overpowered stuff. Yeah. With the only exception being Rainbow Shine for the design constraint thing. She went places after the fact, but she was still the only sort of one that still confuses people to this day a little bit.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I've tried to come up with something for Rainbow Shine, and I really couldn't find anything that was too good.
Remains
or something that they don't already have.
Yeah. Remains something of a mystery, but Interplay will keep their peace on that one. But
I wonder if we're going to see more liberal bans like that in the future.
Yeah, well, I mean, to be fair, that's kind of what Applejack is too. Given, again, we'll get to her when we get to her, but she's kind of similarly in between. Like, she doesn't enable anything egregious like Bulk Biceps did back in the day, like Vapor Trail did back when Twilight was still around. But she's got that similar sort of, this card is always going to be in the meta kind of thing happening. So it's possible we might already be seeing that more liberal approach, where Interplay is going to take a more interventionist attitude towards keeping the meta diverse.
Yep.
So, getting back to the question of, I suppose, what control is going to look like in Harmony these days. One of the things that I've seen and thought about, and you would be familiar because you ran this deck back in the Harmony Constructed tournament just last month or so, is Chaos Control. It's that deck generally didn't use F-Stop, not as much, because it relied a lot more on getting the correct flips than playing events at any given point. And it's still, most importantly, that's still something that you can do forever, is just flip the right card, Doctor Who's it back into your hand, flip it again, yada, yada, yada. It still has the same sort of longevity that F-Stop used to give you back in Harmony as well. So that's certainly one possibility.
Yeah, I mean, the idea of Chaos Control is pretty much the same as in Event Control. You just reuse the same effect over and over again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so it's kind of I certainly, from what I've seen and from what I've looked at, it's currently the best candidate to slot into that position of this is what the sort of long-term control is going to look like. It's also more. Let me see here. I'm trying to remember your Harmony Chaos Control deck. How Harmony air quotes was it? It was like mostly core, wasn't it?
Well, there was like Cheerly. There are some cards you need from Harmony. There's Cheerly. There's Scootaloo. Let me actually open it.
Yeah, those two are pretty strong. That's true.
There was also Magic Duel, which was there because I really wanted to start face-offs on my own to force flips, just like the staff does.
Mm-hmm.
So it's was additional stuff in that sense. Another Harmony card I have is Destiny Drain, which is great.
Yep.
And I think that's it. So it was Cheerly, Scootaloo, Destiny Drain, and Magic Duel.
Okay.
Everything else was core legal.
So, if I think about it, and I guess this conversation is kind of going down the direction of whether this deck is ever going to make its way into core. It's conceivable that we could get strong enough chaos effects on some set down the line that replace Cheerly and Scootaloo. Magic Duel probably not, just because those showdown cards have been somewhat problematic in their time, and we're likely not going to get something on the same level as them. So it's fair. Sorry, what was the other one?
Destiny Drain.
Right, Destiny Drain. That's actually interesting because Destiny Drain, as people who play Harmony have known, it's been this really interesting card for all the time that it's been in Harmony. Like basically, you in its day you would run it because there was some combo going around that you'd want to get rid of, but it's always been this amazing card that it's always been sort of the seeker missile of cards. Like, okay, that's what your deck's trying to do. Get rid of that. And it's always been a 1 of or a 2 of in purple for the most part. And so it's interesting to think if we'll ever get a replacement for it in later sets or not. I'm not sure if we will.
Yeah. I mean, Destiny Drain is great and outside of shooting down combo. For example, I was playing against Pink. I was quite afraid of removal because my Chaos Control deck relied on having friends. And that's why I was quite afraid of removal. So I just Destiny Drain belly flop. Now I don't have to worry about that. And in addition to all that, I know the entire of my opponent's deck, which helps a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But yeah, I still think we need some more powerful chaos effects for Chaos Control to be viable in core, because Cheerly is kind of the thing that makes this particular deck really strong. because they can't get through your troublemakers because you just end face-offs.
Mm-hmm.
And there are some other harmony cards that are good for this type of deck. They're just not in my deck.
Yeah.
Iron Will, for example.
Oh yeah, Iron Will. Not Chaos Effect, but always been a favorite of Orange Control, just for being the one-sided Trixie, essentially.
Yep.
So yeah.
What other control decks do you think we'll see other than Chaos Control?
So the only other thing that I'm aware of, I did something like this for my adventure article just this past week, and I was informed by some people that it was a thing that existed. Is this idea of using Orange Luna, Dream Guide, and sort of flipping her over and over again to essentially lock out your opponent's hand. The deck that I made used Monsters Manual and Tempest Shadow Troublemaker to do that. And I was also pointed to the old list that would do a Chaos Control-ish thing to flip Chaos Capital of the World to do it. And it's a strong interaction, definitely, if you can pull it off.
Yeah, I think Waking Nightmare was doing that.
Yes, that
it was
the card.
Generally, Waking Nightmare, the deck. It was generally a Chaos Control deck, but it also had Luna's Domain and Capital of the Chaos World.
Yeah, so I guess on that level, it's not really a proper answer to your question, but it is a deck that's out there that didn't have F-stops in it.
Yeah. I'm just more interested in control diversity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Which, clearly that's what banning F-stop is supposed to achieve. So, as you mentioned when we first started talking about this, that there are other recursion options, or at least event recursion options. Moondancer being the one that's, I think, probably gained the most traction, given she's shown up occasionally in core. She's the sort of the most compact of the packages that can do it. So, yeah, for those unfamiliar, I'm talking about Moondancer. What's the name of the card? Detail-oriented, I think?
Yeah, detail-oriented. With prepared and immediate, play event from discard pile, and if it enters your discard pile, banish it.
Yeah.
But her rec is really high and she's very expensive, but she's still very good.
Yeah, totally. In a world where playing events forever doesn't actually happen, then just oftentimes just being able to play them multiple times is still pretty good. And for anybody who's afraid of that, if it would enter your discard pile, banish it instead text, it's worth pointing out that events can never be captured with uniqueness or whatever. That banish will always happen.
Yeah. Well, unless you replace Tarswell Research.
Yes, that is correct. So long as
I think that's the only event that does that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I guess if you're playing... No, you're right. No, just Tarswell Research. So yeah, and as I said, there are other packages out there that do the same thing. Princess Cadence you mentioned with some sorts of plus one power counters. I've always been a fan of Starlight Glimmer, Magic Constructor myself.
Oh yeah.
Provided you have some semi-reliable source of unicorns. Right now that's a little unwieldy. Basically, you have to bring a lot of elements together. But in the future, it's possible that something works out for it.
I think Starlight would do better if Purple was creating not Figment tokens, but Unicorn tokens, unlike White.
Yeah.
Instead of White, I mean. But right now, to get like more Unicorn friends reliably, you have to play them, or you have to splash White. Maybe even pink for something like Bodyguards.
Yeah, Bodyguard is I think like the most reliable method right now. But yeah, that right there requires you to be tricolor, and like tricolor control can work, but it's another point of failure.
Yeah, I mean, you just need a lot of things to happen to use Starlight Glimmer. Then you need your free colors, you need Bodyguards, you need Unicorns, and you need a Silent Glimmer. It's quite unreliable.
Mm-hmm. But in any event, that's what I mean. So far as I'm aware, that's kind of what we're looking at. That and Cadence and Wind Dancer. If you want to try to build F-Stop again, essentially.
Mm-hmm. On to J?
Sure. So, getting off at the more controversial end of the spectrum, the ban on Applejack Ambassador of Honesty. Now, you said that you were surprised by this one. Perhaps you could elaborate a little bit more on why exactly.
Yeah, well, first of all, I didn't expect them to ban the main, but I guess a lot of people were complaining about it. But my opinion, like, obviously they banned because AJ was just dominant right now, right? But the thing about dominance, I think AJ was really dominant right now because of the presence of main 6. Because main 6 was stomping other decks really hard. Let it be aggro decks or control decks. Main 6 was stomping them all, except AJ farming, because AJ farming doesn't play any friends, usually. At least in the state it is right now. And AJ farming can splash main 6 by itself. So because of the presence of main 6 of this very combination, this makes farming really dominant because this combination doesn't do anything against it. And yeah, I mean, I'm not saying that farming isn't strong, but I think it was like what pushed it way up was main 6, not the AJ itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is true that this is a given that I think you make a pretty good point on that, and that main 6 was present in the sort of canonical farming deck, as it were. This is a 1-2 punch at that deck, which is something you normally don't see. That's like a really heavy-handed way to say, no, this deck is just not going. Especially again, as you said, going after the main. Like that is just saying, no. This deck is not getting like a power nerf. This deck is getting destroyed, and so it's there's an argument to be made that given how main 6 was a confounding factor on the deck strength, this is perhaps very heavy-handed as far as that farming deck goes.
Yeah.
At the same time, sorry,
yeah,
go ahead. Well,
no, go ahead.
Yeah. At the same time, like I had said previously, I think that Applejack Ambassador, having been present in the meta and present in the meta at a pretty strong place for so long, basically ever since she's been a thing. Ever since Odyssey, when she first came out, this farming deck has existed and been like top 8s basically that whole time. It was getting into a similar situation as to what we had with Pile of Presence back in Harmony, where that deck just had been around forever and eventually did need something to sort of make things a little bit fresher. And so in that sense, I can understand how some action needed to be taken. And we had I had discussions about it with several people, and it seems like the only way to actually make the deck go away was probably to get rid of Applejack.
Yeah, but then again, she's only banned in core. She can still roam freely in Harmony, which is the most like unexpected thing for me to see.
Yeah,
I mean, I've had a little bit of discussion on Discord channel about that, like why she was banned only in core, like either ban her in both or in neither. And yeah, I guess in Harmony people have more tools to deal with farming, but on the other hand, farming also has more tools. Everyone was saying that farming is not going to be good in core because it loses so much from Harmony.
but yeah, you're right. That wasn't the case. Yeah, I don't know. It is true that other decks do have a little bit more to work with in Harmony. Like for the most part, my memories of the Harmony meta, generally speaking, in those days, farming would lose to like really hard control decks because like purple had Twilight Sparkle Ursa Vanquisher, which was an amazing card against farm, and would usually reach some end state where the farming player just wouldn't really have any counterplay available to them anymore. Besides that, like back in those days, I was primarily playing purple, so I'm not entirely sure what the rest of the decks had available to them. I think blue had a chance to just go fast enough, so things were a little bit like less settled, I guess, in Harmony. Whereas, in core, as we've seen, there weren't that many decks that could stand up to Applejack. Now it's true that if you take the case that, like, say, Staff, for example, was the card that just brought Applejack up into the stratosphere, it's true that card's still in Harmony, and it's entirely possible that maybe the Harmony ban is on its way as well, if necessary.
Yeah. Yeah, it's gonna be interesting to see a core meta without farm, because farm is now, at least orange farm is now practically dead in core, and all other farm methods are relying on friends a lot. So it will be interesting to see how that will turn out.
Yeah. Speaking of, there are a couple of contenders around to potentially pick up the farming mantle. Blue farming had been a thing once upon a time, back in, I think Marks in Time was when it was around, with Ambassador of Loyalty and Thunderlane and that sort of thing. Purple farm had been experimented with in Defenders with Professor Sparkle and troublemakers like Glimmer and Star Sword Research and yada yada yada. And then, of course, Thorax farming has also been on the fringes. Honestly, I've never actually seen what a Thorax farming deck looks like. I've never actually seen anyone do it, but it's the kind of main that everyone looked at and said, "Oh, that could maybe be a farming main," and yeah, it's probably out there somewhere.
Yeah, I think people were seeing farm in it because they're familiar with mod, which has kind of similar effect.
Mm-hmm.
Except not getting power from cards in your discard pile, but from your friends on the field. Interesting thing about Thorax farming decks is that they don't care that much about Starlight Enforced Equality. Many people include the Troublemaker in their decks to deal with farming, because it's hard to farm and force equality. But for Torg's deck, this isn't much case because you can just throw your critters there and be good.
Yeah, it will. I was going to say it'll often be more of a help than a hindrance to you. That's to some extent correct. Obviously, Thorax is not going to be 20; he's going to be 2, but it's still, you're right. You're necessarily going to have a bunch of critters in play, and you really only need 3 of them or 4 of them at the problem, and then you're set.
Mm-hmm.
It's true also that, personally, I've been experimenting with the purple side of things, and Professor Sparkle can use Starlight Glimmer as well, because again, she just spends some AT and puts Starlight's power to 0, and then doesn't care about it as well.
Yeah. Well, you still need some friend there to be able to win a flip.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it can be pretty good. I would say that spending 3 AT on that is quite expensive, but then again, purple is all about gaining AT, so that's probably not too bad.
Yeah, from my experience with experimenting with the deck, there's an interesting sort of trade-off between putting in AT generating friends, sort of cover to cover goes in regardless, but such, and how much you want to put the deck in each different direction. You can build it to be more farming oriented and just have a really high flip average, and then you don't have to care as much about spending your AT on stuff. Or you can build it to be a little bit more control oriented and put in a lot more of those standard purple events that are honestly a little bit low on the flips, but will help you with dealing with aggro and other stuff on the other side of the board. It's actually a really interesting sort of dynamic deck that I'd love to refine a bit moving forward, and I'm sure people will refine.
I think you're making choice here between control and farm. What do you want to do more, farm or control your opponent? And I think both of the directions are quite viable.
Mm-hmm.
And for blue farming, as you might know, I experimented with that a little bit for purple-blue, that is.
Oh, yes, you have you had the Ember deck, that's right.
Yeah.
And that went reasonably well for you, right?
Well, it went reasonably well, but it doesn't go that well against pink, because pink just removes my friends and I can't do anything. I can't farm my own troublemakers and I can't confront my problems. But other than that, it did pretty well. I'm pretty happy with the state of the deck right now.
That is the most common refrain of anyone building decks right now in core, it seems. Well, it does well, except against pink.
Yeah.
And maybe that changes a little bit with main 6 gone, but pink is going to remain. Belly Flop still a card. Berry Punch and Orange Swirl still a card. Tempest Shadow and Grubber still a card.
Well, Tempest Shadow and Grubber are not that bad. They're pretty expensive.
Yeah.
So it's basically a very expensive top cakes. Without the power restriction.
Yeah. So, if you're willing to have me go on to a slightly different topic here, one interesting sort of follow-on effect from Applejack getting banned is that it does leave Orange without really a good sort of generalist main. It's true that Muffin Mare still exists, but that main is kind of good at one particular thing. It's good at this sort of aggro-ish, moving power around kind of deck. And Orange is kind of missing a good generalist, run-of-the-mill main that can do a whole bunch of different things.
It's very similar to what we have now with White, where in white we only have basically Octavia, which also requires quite like specific deck building around her. Like there's just no for white and orange. There's just no generally good main that will fit in any deck.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so, one would assume Interplay is aware of that as well, and that should imply that this long-rumored 10th set will include some sort of help in that regard, some sort of generally goodish orange main. I don't know if we're really in a proper position to speculate on that at the moment, but one would hope.
Yeah, we'll see. I really hope they do. That's one of my hopes for the next set.
Yeah.
Well, one of my hopes now for the next set.
Well, it's got to be now, yeah.
Yeah, tell someone a week ago that, oh, we probably need a good orange main. Everyone will laugh at you.
Yeah. So, speaking of, well, not necessarily speaking of, but we started off the stream talking about or mentioning the fact that we've got a bunch of conventions coming up. Given that Farm is gone now, given that Harmony Purple Control is gone now, there's a point to be made in thinking about what this might mean as far as which decks that you're going to be facing and which decks you might consider bringing to these large tournaments coming up. You're going to be at Galacon next week. I'm aware of that.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't ask you ever to spoil for anyone else who may be watching which deck you're going to bring, but
Oh, I'm bringing Portal deck. I'm not hiding it.
Okay, fair enough.
For core, at least. Not for Harmony. For Harmony, I haven't decided yet. I think I will just build something 2 days before the con and go with that.
Sure.
But for Harmony, for core, I will bring my Portal deck, especially with farming band, because one of the weakness of my particular Portal deck was that it wasn't very good at dealing against AJ farm. It was good at many other things, but not against farm. And when someone was asking like, oh, but what you're going to do against farm? I was like, I'm going to cry. Now I don't have to.
It's true, yeah.
So yeah, I'm not sure if there will be core tournament at Galacon though. The organizer isn't sure himself from what I know. But we'll see. I'm still bringing core deck. Like, even if there's no tournament, sure there will be people to play around with.
Of course, yeah. And so that's essentially sort of the meta that you're predicting is kind of just the same as it was before, but without without farm.
Well, I think many people will just modify their decks to not include any anti-farming tools, because now you don't really have to.
Mm-hmm.
So that makes other decks stronger as well. But yeah, I'm not sure. It's hard for me to predict anything.
Sure, good point. Yeah. You actually make a very good point. It touches on a few things I want to try now. Because like I had purple yellow a long time ago, and that one was like, for what it's worth, built to be anti-farm, and it wasn't even particularly good at being anti-farm. But it had a reasonable success rate against aggro and such, and if I just get rid of the anyway, I'm hypothesizing, and I shouldn't be doing that on stream. But yeah, as far as like
deck building,
yeah, this isn't the live deck building stream. This is a conversation stream. But yeah, I've got a whole bunch of different ideas for Gen Con right now. The purple farming deck that I mentioned is maybe not the greatest deck, but I found it like really fun to play, and so that's a possibility. Go back and refurbish purple yellow, like I just mentioned. Even I'd actually really like to try one of these alternative farming decks and just see where it takes me, provided I can like find the cards for them.
Yeah, that's one of my problems as well. It's hard to find cards for me. Like, I would love to play my blue-purple farming deck in core instead of Portal 1, but I don't have many cards for it.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can also, since Gen Con is after BronyCon, you can look at the BronyCon meta and cook something out based on that.
It's a good point. If you're willing to do some like really rapid fire 1 week brewing, yeah, I suppose I could try that out. But yeah, I think that about covers all the topics that I had in mind.
Yeah.
I guess ultimately, all that really matters is just kind of, generally speaking, taking this ban list as a whole. First impression, thumbs up or thumbs down?
I think thumbs up. I'm pretty happy with the bans overall, and all the bans. Even some of them I'm a little bit confused about, which I explained earlier. I'm still supporting them overall.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think ultimately, based on conversations that I've had with people, this isn't entirely. There weren't too many surprises from this list for me. F-Stop was a card that had been complained about. Applejack was, as we said, the most controversial, but I think there was enough of an argument to be made that it probably needed to happen, and we'll see. If Orange doesn't get the help in the next set, then, well, we'll be back at, as you said, we'll be very similar to White, and, well, we obviously don't want that for the color, but what will be will be. But ultimately, yes, I think this is pretty good. I mean, it's getting rid of main 6. I would probably have to give it a thumbs up, even if it also banned like Tempest Shadow or something.
Which one?
I don't
know. The
main? Yeah, like the purple main or something. I can accept a world without amazing things, so long as main 6 isn't in it.
Yeah, and it shakes meta quite a bit, like these bans. Maybe some people will regain interest to play the game at the competitive level.
We'll see. Yeah. Alrighty. Well, anyway, appreciate everybody who showed up here for the stream. See, there's a few of you in there in the viewer list. For our next stream is, as I say, going to be at the normal 2 week interval, which is going to be Sunday morning of Gen Con. And as we say, we'll have plenty of updates to bring you after. There's going to be like 3 or 4 tournaments taking place between this stream and next one, right? There's going to be like BronyCon and Galacon next week, and then Gen Con that weekend, and like TrotCon is happening this weekend right now. So there's going to be all kinds of convention results to talk about.
Yeah, that'll be a lot to talk about, I think.
Mm-hmm. And maybe, just maybe, we might get some reveal or spoiler or set 10 thing happen at one of these cons. That would be nice.
Yeah, that would be great. Maybe an orange main?
Well, that'd be a nice way to get things started. We see orange main that's like the same thing except it's Diligent 1 or something. Anyway. Yeah, so like I say, I think that's everything for me this week.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me just pop the end screen up. Should have done that before we got into there, but yes, August 5th is going to be our next stream. If you know anybody who couldn't make it at this time, or you ever want to go back and watch some of our previous content, Our YouTube channel is right there up on the screen. This week's episode is going to be getting archived probably in the next couple of hours, so you can watch it there right away. If you do come down there and you like our content and want to get notified about it, feel free to give us a subscription. That's always appreciated as well. But in the meantime, I've been Cursor Chords.
And I'm being Hifrock.
And presumably in 2 weeks' time, Solving will be back. He wasn't here this week, but I'm sure he's having fun. In any event, see you in a fortnight.
Yeah.